Oh yeah!
Endless night, under stars so bright.
Tony Gabagool, Grandma. It's nothing but fat and nitrates.
Gabagool, over here.
Guardian of the flood, he watches over souls through the darkest hours, guiding broken hearts with unseen powers. Jesus doesn't sleep, his vigil he will keep. In shadows he will lead, his promise runs so deep. He mends the silent cries, hears the whispered pleas, in dreams he'll quiet fears, amid the rustling leaves, through the endless dawn.
Hey yo, this is Cece from Pressure Boys, the best smoke on the East Coast, and you're watching the WARR Multiverse. Sheesh!
There we go. There we go. Good morning. You know, I was sitting there thinking about how we're doing on the show with all these episodes coming and still going. And as usual, you know, I never do a script. I'm an anti-script person. I believe that if I didn't know the topic, I shouldn't be talking about it. So the only way to truly prove that you know the topic is to just talk about it. You don't need to write it down. I mean, I'm sure I could write down a script and make it like this, fantastical dialogue, but why? You know, that I might as well just write an audio book and record that and then just let you listen to that, which maybe I'll do also, but like, let's finish the regular books first, record those as audio books, then we'll work on like the podcast companion book, I guess. I don't know. But anyway, good morning. I hope you're all having a wonderful day. I hope it's, whether it's the afternoon, morning, evening. Time doesn't exist, as we all know. It's all your perspective. Because it's all the same time. Yet, depending on your place on the planet, it's a different time for you. Therefore, from your perspective, time is different than time for me. But it doesn't matter because you could also be listening to this days later. It doesn't even matter. Weeks later, months later, years later. And it's still a fantastic day. It is an unbelievable, awesome day to be a god of war, which is me. And today, you know, I was sitting there, or the other day I was sitting there thinking, I was like, you know, what are we going to talk about next time? What's going to be the title of the episode? And I was like, man, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day and I was just like thinking, and I was like, oh yeah, like this is that, and magic is real and this and that. So I was thinking about it, how I spoke about it in the past, and I was like, you know, we touch on the topic of magic so often, but never delve into it. And if you've watched the Ancient Alien show or other Ancient Alien theorists, any other YouTuber, podcaster, somebody, on a radio show like Coast to Coast or whatever, you know, all of those people think that magic is just misinterpreted technology. You see, the gods came here and they weren't really gods. They were beings from another world. So they used technology to get themselves from their world to our world, just like we're learning to do now to get to Mars and the moon and other places eventually. Which may be true. But it doesn't mean that magic also doesn't exist. In fact, I would say that it also proves that magic exists because you can take things and realize that, hey, there's a technology behind it. Like, for example, when they talk about dragons flying through the sky and fire coming out and loud noise and thunder. Well, of course, if it was a real dragon, for example, like let's say a living dinosaur or something, giant beast, it would naturally make a lot of noise. It would naturally make a lot of thunder and land and thud and all of that thunderous noise. And so it could be a thing, but then you get to the fire and the sound and the smoke trails coming out, and you realize it basically sounds like a fighter jet flying around. And it might be, actually, because if you think about it, a craft being people from another world who would come here, they would have their larger vehicle and then they would send out a smaller vehicle. And a smaller vehicle would therefore react to the atmosphere of our planet the same as others. And just because we see glowing orb UFOs now doesn't mean that we always saw glowing orb UFOs. They could be anything. They just because it was one people at one time or people now doesn't mean it was always the same extraterrestrials that came here. People like to think that there's one group out there that's been overseeing all of it for millions of years, but it may be multiple groups. In fact, if you listen to Paul Hellyer even says that he knows of about 7 different species that are existing on our planet and coming here. So if you think about it like that, from that perspective, these beings could all have different types of craft, different types of things going on. And all of these things could be different types of technology. Just because we make vehicles that you are basically powered by putting in a fuel source and launching it out the back and you drive forward or up in some cases, doesn't mean that other cultures and other civilizations wouldn't develop technology differently. The same type of technology even. So you could imagine, for example, that a spaceship would come here, launch itself through, and then they had some type of smaller landing craft, and that landing craft had wings and all these different things going on, and the wings could have, maybe they were an animalistic type culture, and they drew it like a demonic bird. Maybe they were like a warlike culture and it looked like a dragon flying. Maybe they made the wings like that and then launched it out of the back. Maybe they used a similar type of technology. Maybe they had multiple technologies in their arsenal. You never know these things unless you get like a formal written record, but it doesn't mean that it's not possible. So if you look at a depictions of a dragon or stories of a dragon flying through the sky and the descriptions of the thunder and the rumbling, it may in fact be a craft. We spoke about in the past how they may be leftover dinosaurs. The idea of a dragon we might think of in ancient times as like 2, 3, 4, 5,000 years ago. But this might be a long-lasting memory from 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. Maybe it was so devastating to our people that we kept the story alive for literally tens of thousands of years because these creatures were so horrifying, when in reality they were just leftover dinosaurs who were able to survive because they had wings and could find newer and newer climate and keep searching until, they eventually adapted. Who knows? But the the point is it's possible to both be magic and misunderstood technology. Because when we're talking about misunderstood technology, we can hear things and see things from the words that are written in the pages and the stories that are told from the ancients and the people who are still living today and keep telling the same stories. Say, oh, this and this happened, and we believe it, and we hear the sounds and we heard the noise and saw the skies. And now you think, well, how can um, you remember for tens of thousands of years that you heard the sound? Well, if you're a storyteller, think of like an author, and imagine your grandfather was an author and wrote a bunch of vivid stories and used a lot of detail, and you loved to hear those stories growing up, and then you grew up and you became an author yourself, and you wrote a lot of detail and you remembered the stories and you kept remembering the histories, and you remembered the way your grandfather told you the story. You wrote down as much detail as you could remember. It's the same sort of thing. These people would remember the story. You would hear one of the next generation would somebody would hear the stories and really love to hear all their stories. And so that person would be realized as they would be the next storyteller because they were intrigued by it. They loved it. They wanted to do it. They remembered all the stories. They remembered the detail of it, and then they passed that on. So you could realize then that while obviously not every detail is the same, not everything is recorded, generally speaking, a person remembers most of the important details and writes that into their story or speaks it into their story if they don't have a writing system or are just telling a story. So the detail is there and the memory is there, and as you're talking you're pulling on the memory. And so for in our example, that little child, as it grew up and the grandfather died and now this person's the storyteller, as he's telling the story he's going to remember all the details that his grandfather told during the story, and the passion that they put into it to tell how important the message that they were conveying was. And that grandfather probably did the same thing. So you can imagine that over the generations and the centuries, even though there were always probably exaggerations and um, things sound more extravagant than they may or may not have been, you can trust that most of the detail at its core is pretty much probably consistent to a point, obviously, because it's not written down. We're talking about verbal storytelling from generation to generation. So, but you can take the information at its core and compare it to the different stories you hear and the writings and all of that, and you can find a common line of truth to it. This is where ancient alien theory comes in, because they say, oh, here's our common line of truth. There's common talk of magic, of gods, of this being came down and brought information and brought knowledge and brought whatever, and there's a common line of that across every culture, so therefore it must have been aliens, it must be God, it must be this and that. All could be possible, but the point is that there's the common line of it, and it's the same thing with passing down your stories orally and your histories from generation to generation. While there may be adaptations and added drama and things like that, there's always the commonality of the storyline. This is why you can take those stories, as long as you listen with a fine-tooth comb and hear the truth beyond it. Now, when you listen to this and you hear the stories of, the things coming down and lots of thunder and noise and all this drama and whatever, there may be exaggerations to it, but the point is something came down. I mean, if something came down from the sky, you know about it. I mean, things don't usually come down unless it's like a bird, or some rain, or an insect or something. But like, if you see a giant thing coming down from the sky, whether you heard a bunch of thunder or not, really makes no difference. Something came down. So you're not talking about magic there. You're talking about misidentifying technology. So how do we get from the question of, is it misidentifying technology or is it magic? The point is the commonality. Misidentifying technology is based on visual aspects of seeing things and objects doing something physical in the world, while magic is something that creates an impact but is short-lived and isn't like a permanent fixture on the world in a physical context, as in like a stone structure, a physical craft, landing, a building, a house, something like that, where a physical construct. We're talking about, so misidentifying technology would be something that's like a physical construct, something landing, something, doing something like that. So, but magic is something that you're able to, how to describe magic, right? Um, Something that you're able to perceive and witness, yet doesn't come from the natural occurrences of the world. Like, for example, whether you perform a magical act and then the tsunami comes or whatever, that's something different, and we'll get into that. But like, it's you're talking about something that has an impact. You didn't create like a physical, um, object that landed, or like and created a tsunami or something. You just had an impact, and then the result happened, but you didn't have a physical object. You get what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to differentiate between physical occurrences and things that are impacted without the physical occurrence. But magic comes from a lot of different sources. For example, if you think of like, a magician with abracadabra and all of that, that's like a stage performance. It's an optical illusion, because the truth of what's happening is not directly in front of your eyes, so you can't see it, so your brain can't line up the turn of events in saying, okay, there was a coin, and then I saw it slip into his sleeve, and so when he opened his hand, there was no more coin, and it appeared as if it just vanished by magic, when in reality, it didn't vanish by magic, it was slipped into your sleeve. But if you don't see the coin slipping into the sleeve, it appears like it just vanished by magic. So the disconnect of what your brain knows of the flow of information is the illusion that perceives the magic. This is why you don't know that what you're looking at is technology and you can perceive it as magic. But what you also don't know as being an occurrence without a physical impact is also magic the way you perceive it because you don't know the chain of events. We spoke a lot about in the past and in a lot of our past episodes about the spoken word and how speaking can influence the world around us by creating vibrations on what you're doing, and so it creates a physical impact because sound is both a wave and physical. However, it's not a physical object that I'm looking at. So if I were to speak words in a magical way and create a tsunami, I had a physical impact on something, but there was no physicality on, there was no physicality in, like as if like an object was created or something, or I physically grabbed the earth and made it shake, and then the tsunami was created off of that or something. Like there's no physical impact, but sound is physical. So what I'm getting at is that your brain doesn't see the physical impact because it's not like a physical construct in our 3D reality like this desk, these monitors, a wall, a tree. It's not a physical construct like that, an object that reflects light off of and then your eyes appear it and it appears like that. Yet it impacts the world physically because it exists as a wave and a particle. So when you're pushing sound waves upon the universe, you're making a physical impact. There are now, whether it be large or small, is really perspective. Because it could appear to you like a major impact on life and the world and reality when it's only appearing to you in your reality, in your life, and the way you perceive the world as being largely impactful, when the rest of the people just appear to it as being, a minor occurrence in the world, unless it's something obviously majorly impactful. So when you listen to the words that are being spoken and you can physically feel the vibration of the words, that's having a physical impact on the world. If you've ever looked at different studies of sound technology and sound resonance, and if for example, a lot of ancient structures were built in the old days with sound resonances, like the Hypogeum in Malta, for example. So you can do a lot of different things with sound resonance, and when you measure those sounds and you feel it, you can physically feel it on your body. And they believe, many historians and archaeologists believe that this created, what is it? Acoustic archaeology or whatever they're calling it now. They believe that by feeling the vibration of the sound had some sort of religious or psychological impact on the people that, from their perspective, created a really profound impact on the world around them, or at least on their physical personage. So, you would feel this vibration in your body, and you would you know, be like, wow, I really feel the divine gods with me because I'm feeling this physical vibration. Even though what you're really just feeling is sound being amplified at a certain frequency. So you feel, but the point is you feel it at a physical impact on a physical level in your body, even though there's no physical object in there, like, how I put my hand down on this desk and I can physically feel the desk. It's not the same concept, even though you're feeling it physically. So now we've gotten to that different physicality point. You can feel the vibrations in the words that you're speaking and think, oh, this is how I'm feeling the physical world around me, and therefore I'm creating a physical impact. But by doing this, you have to remember that things are always from A, your perspective, B, from the perspective of the world around you, meaning the cumulative perspective, which is why that we all see that trees are green, grass is green, sky is blue, ocean is blue, things like that, those common things that we all see. The world is, well, just because it's not physical in the world from a 3D perspective doesn't mean that it doesn't make a physical impact. So when we talk about the spoken word, for example, you can speak if you were to, for example, vibrate your voice, if you could do this, if a person could do this at a certain frequency, you would be able to create a physical impact on the world around you, even though you aren't doing anything physical. So, and let's say, for example, a person was able to do something like this. You could perceive that as magic. Even though what the person is really doing is manipulating sound vibrations, your brain can't see your brain sees the words coming out of your mouth, hears the sounds of it, but doesn't see the reaction, only sees the end result. So it's magic because there's A happens, and then somehow in between you don't know what happens, and the result of B happens, or C, right? So you have A, the occurrence, something in the middle, and then the end result. But in these circumstances, all your brain sees is the beginning and the end result. It doesn't see what happens in the middle. So it's like the coin in your hand at a magic show. You see the coin in my hand, I close my hand and then open it again and there's no more coin, and you think, wow, magic, it vanished, because your brain didn't see the coin slip into my sleeve. You didn't see what happened in between the start and the end result. So you perceive it as magic. But it's not magic. It's just different understanding of the physicality of the universe. For example, you go into, let's look at an example of. We're going to look at two examples from the Bible. The first example I'm going to get to is, which we've talked about, everybody talks about, is Ezekiel's wheel. And Ezekiel has the vision of the wheel within the wheel, surrounded by winged cherubim and all this stuff and light. And but then when you read the story, you realize that Ezekiel describes all the sound. He hears the thunderous noise. He sees the object ascending. These winged cherubim come out. And so what if we're talking about the Watchers from thousands of years ago? They have a craft, and it's a disc within a disc. One of the discs is spinning while the outer disc does not, as described by Ezekiel. And as it lands, it creates all this thunderous noise. And then a being walks out, and he's got wings on, he's in some sort of suit, and he lands down and comes and talks to Ezekiel, and Ezekiel says, "Oh, yes, you are some sort of divine God. Of course I will come to you." Because he doesn't know that this is just technology from another culture that spend hundreds or even thousands of years developing their culture and eventually creating a craft that can fly through the air and is somehow working on spinning and spinning. And so he goes up into the craft and he says, "Oh, this is unbelievable. Am I in heaven? This is, all I see, all these lights and these colors, and the climate here is so peaceful. What is this?" But he doesn't know that it's air conditioning. He doesn't know that pure oxygen is being pumped into the spaceship, and the air is pressurized and perfectly nice. And when he goes in, he describes being blasted with some air. In ancient Greek cultures, when they were invited into the abode of the gods, you would hear the stories about how when they got up to the top of Mount Olympus and a door opened and they were welcomed in, they were in this small chamber and they were blasted with this scent that smells like ambrosia and all these other things. And the gods and these other beings would be there. But in this room, ancient alien theorists and other people look at this and then they say, "Oh, well, maybe he's in some sort of cleansing chamber." Because he walks into this place he describes, and he's in this small chamber. He's blasted with some sort of thing, and cleansed in the smell of ambrosia, which we know from Greek text that it was this clarifying, cleansing substance mixture. And he says, "Oh, it smells like ambrosia." And he goes and then walks into the greater area of the thing and meets the gods. And what if he's in some sort of cleansing chamber? You would think about it, if you were an extraterrestrial being from another world, from another planet, from another whatever, and you go to another world, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you don't get sick by some sort of diseases. If the Native Americans back in the days of colonization and all of that knew about spread of diseases like that, they would have stayed the hell away from us for a while until they could, the air accumulated. And even if they stayed away, disease would spread through the air, and they would still get sick, and maybe, they would grow tolerant. Apparently, I guess some of them did eventually over generations, but it wasn't pleasant. And, so we would keep away. I mean, think about COVID, just in COVID a few years ago. Even still, as soon as you get sick, you quarantine away from everybody because you don't want it to spread. You don't want it to spread through the air. You don't want it to spread through contact, all of that. And so you stay away. And, so why is it so far-fetched that an extraterrestrial culture would go to the same lengths. It's not far-fetched. They would go to the same lengths. They would do the same thing. And so, when they would meet these human beings, there's no doubt that they would go and protect themselves, whether it be walking out in some sort of suit and or going outside, or when they come into their building, cleansing them to make sure that they don't bring any diseases to you. Why is that so far-fetched? It's not. It's not far-fetched at all. And so these beings would do something similar. And they would maybe protect themselves. And if they wanted to put themselves in a suit, why wouldn't they give themselves wings like a jetpack? They would, why not? Why would you want to walk around all day? I don't want to walk around all day. What the hell is wrong with you? I'm tired. My legs hurt. I don't want to walk around. But the point is Ezekiel's wheel was a physical occurrence. All of these different things are physical occurrences. Take a sip of water. So these are physical occurrences on the world. You see these things, you hear these things, and it's all a physical thing that you see. But within these stories, you have A through Z occurrences right in front of your eyes, where your brain can logically make sense of the sights and sounds and the start and end results of things that you're hearing and seeing. Excuse me. And so this is how you know that what you're looking at in these stories and what you're reading about and listening to is misidentified technology. You have the start, middle, and end result. Your brain can logically see, or in this case, read the understanding of it. Just because you're understanding it from a modern perspective doesn't mean you're understanding it falsely. So when you hear this, you can see, oh, this makes sense because I have the start, middle, and end result. Now, I bring you to the story of the Battle of Jericho. Now the Israelites have to go and conquer the city of Jericho in order to continue on to Canaan and the rest of the area where they're going on to the promised land. So the Israelites have a task in front of them. And in the Bible it states that God commands the Israelites to go and march around the city. Now, you could imagine thousands of troops. These are soldiers marching. You got to remember, this isn't some walking around luxurious trip through the wilderness, listing along through the woods on a trail in some mountain hike or whatever that's really barely a hike, and you're just waltzing through the woods. This ain't none of that. This ain't no walk around in the city aimlessly. No, these are soldiers marching in formation, stomping their feet, saluting, whatever, blowing the horns, beating drums, as the story says. So the soldiers are beating the drums and marching along, slamming their feet down, thud, 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 and the drums are thud, 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 and they all keep going. And they do this and they circle the city. Now, God, quote unquote, tells them to do this once a day, circle the city 7 times, and you go around, And then on the seventh day, you circle it all again, and then finally you all stand in a circle around the city, and you blow the horns, the ram's horns that they had, towards the city walls. And then God told them that the walls will fall. So what do? They march around, they beat the drums, they stomp their feet, and then on the seventh day they're like, all right, let's blow the horn. And then they blow the horn, and then the walls come down. Well, what happened from the Israelites' perspectives, right? They had a conversation, they made a plan. They decided, oh, we're going to march around and, then blow the horn and intimidate these guys. Think about the average soldier who doesn't know the plan from by every finest detail, that the commanders have come up with. Think about D-Day, until they hit the beach, until they were getting ready to board the ships, most of them weren't even told what they were doing. And then even when they were ready to hit the beach, most of them didn't know exactly what they were doing, because you had to know only what you needed to know to survive the mission. You didn't know exactly what all your commanders knew and the position of every single thing that the commanders knew about. You only knew what you saw from your perspective and what they told you. So from your perspective, you're a bunch of soldiers, you're marching around, you think, oh, we're marching around to intimidate these guys. We're going to intimidate the shit out of them. We're going to show them how fierce we are. All 20,000 of us are going to march around and we're going to beat our drums and carry our swords and our spears and our axes, and we're going to grunt and yell and look at you, and you're going to stand there on the wall and you're going to look down at us and you're going to quake in your boots. And then they, and they're all marching around, and then suddenly the wall came down. But what you don't realize is that there was some sort of calculation going on, that all these soldiers marching around in a circle, and maybe there was some sort of calculation that, okay, they said, all right, the commanders said, all right, well, let's see, we got 20,000 soldiers, and if we march in a perimeter about, let's say 10 meters wide around the city, and we make sure that they're all stomping their feet and beating the drums, and it'll create this sort of resonance of sound in the air, and it'll keep circulating. And then when at the end, if we blow, let's see, 47 horns, and the horns make this sort of amplification of this sort of magnitude, we can mathematically say, put it together, all this stuff, and we're doing the math, and then, okay, this is what we're going to do. Now, after crunching the numbers, we realized that all 20,000 soldiers need to circle around the city once a day for 6 days, and then on the seventh day, circle around the city 7 times, and then blow the horns to force the air vibrations towards the city walls. And the city walls should have been this whole time holding in the energy from the stomping, because the stomping would have hit the walls, and the resonance would have been holding in that stone, and then when we blow the horns at it, the resonance will crack the stone, and the foundation will fall. So we did the math on this, king, and this is what we're going to do. And then the king says, well, I am a soldier, warrior, ruler, and I don't understand your math, but okay, I trust your counsel, and we do what you say. And then they go and they do exactly what they say, and so the start, and then the walls come down. So from the person's perspective, they marched around, and then the walls came down. But your eyes don't see that, okay, the sound vibration, which is actually, partly physical, created this little barrier of sound and pushed it at the wall and, added all this force up against the wall and on its molecule levels or whatever. And then the end result came that once the sound got too much for the stone, it broke the stone and the vibrations caused it to shatter. And that's how the wall fell, and then we were able to go. But so let's just say that that's exactly what happened, right? That's exactly the mathematical principles. They did the math, they figured it out. There was A, here's the plan. B, how do we execute it? We figure out the math and we put it into motion. C, we put the plan into motion. The mathematics works. It comes in. We all make a plan. We verbalize it that we all agree that this is going to be the plan, and then we put it into action. D, right? And then we get to D, and we're putting in the action, and then we get to E, and the sound vibration resonances are right there, and then F, we blow the horn, and then G, we and it keeps going on in stages and stages until finally the end result is that the wall comes down. But you don't see that from the average person's perspective. The commanders, which you're told is God, has this plan. The plan is that we all march around and then the walls will come down. So A, the plan, B, march around, and then Z, the wall came down. What else happened in between? You don't see that magic. You didn't see any of it, and this is why it's magic. Because you are perceiving it as being a magical occurrence because your brain didn't see all of or at least understand the concept of it all happening. For example, if I, was looking up at the sky and through a telescope and I witnessed there was a star I was looking at and then all of a sudden it vanished. No explosion, no nothing. Well, where'd it go? It's gone. But you don't understand that it got sucked into a black hole. You don't understand that you don't understand the physical occurrences of what's happening trillions of miles away in space because you didn't see it with your eyes, or at least understand the concept, or even know that there was a black hole, moving through the galaxy, or rather the galaxy's moving, whatever, and you didn't know that that was there, so you couldn't possibly have known that the star had gotten sucked into a black hole, and that's why it vanished. So from your perspective, it just blinked out. God decided to pluck that star out of the sky. You don't know what happened in between. That's one form of magic, because you can take physics of things that you don't know, or at least, and apply them, because the universe is not an A and B, white and black universe. There's multiple colors in between. It's not even a grayscale universe. It's not even, life is gray and there's all the colors in between. Life is this expansive, extravagant mess, a jumble of a whole bunch of things. There's all these colors in between. There's a whole expansive view of the world that you can look at and listen to and say, okay, this is why so and so is happening, because I see this, I understand all this, and the universe continues to go on and around. It's ever expansive. And there are things that could happen that just because we don't understand it as physics today doesn't mean that some other culture doesn't understand it now, doesn't mean that we won't understand it in the future. So just because we can't create a black hole or a wormhole that we could traverse to another galaxy today doesn't mean that we can't physically do it in a few centuries. Doesn't mean that some other culture can't do it right now. But just because you don't understand the technology of how it's beyond or the physics of how it occurred doesn't mean that it's magic. But when you think of magic because of our fantasies of the world, you think of Harry Potter and a bunch of spells and I create all this stuff. But back in the day, fire was magic. Cooking your food was magic. Because you didn't understand that just by the fire would heat up the meat and the meat would tenderize and then that would be it would change its end result to be more edible to you and you would be able to nourish the thing. But if you didn't know how to start the fire, the flame just bursting would be magic. Everything, like we always talk about, is from your perspective. It's understanding from your life and how you visualize the world. So if you can understand that it's possible for magic to be real because it's a physics or a physic occurrence that you don't understand yet, you realize then everything is possible because the universe allows you to witness everything from that knowledgeable perspective. And so you're able to create an A, B, C, all the way to Z occurrence, a start, an end result, and see everything that happened in the middle. So how do we, you would go about, in a lot of the ancient world, for example, there was all different kinds of magic that all has to do with the spoken word. For, look at in the Western world and even in other cultures, but we'll just stick with the Western world for this example. There's the concept and the idea of curses or putting a curse on somebody. And you speak these words out and you do some sort of action and then this person is cursed on the, not having a normal occurrence in the world that is perceived from those people's involved perspectives as being a negative result or a negative action. But the point is those people had to speak the words into existence in order to have the physical impact. Next, we go into India, where they have the term of mantras. And other cultures have this too, same similar word, like in Tibet and in other Buddhist cultures. China also had this, and I forget what the word is in Japan, but it's very similar. And the idea is that you would speak the words and create some sort of physical impact. For example, I think it was 2000 and whatever. In recent decades, the Indian governments went into this temple. I'm forgetting the name of the temple. Oh my God, we got to look this up now later. and they opened up a bunch of chambers and took a bunch of artifacts and gold. And of course, you know that this was to increase the wealth of the state, because obviously the country is having a lot of physical issue, a lot of economic issues and things like that, especially probably at the time. Remember, we're talking about after the 2008 recession. So, it's a different world. But the point is that they would get to this door, and one of the doors was sealed with a mantra, and they still can't get in to this day. And the mantra is something that nobody knows. And of course, you can break the seal if you know the mantra, but what's the mantra? Well, if you ask them, what is a mantra is really just words you speak with you have a certain physical vibration of the words, and your mind is in a physical place. Your mind is in that your mind is aligned with what you want to happen. Today we call it intent. You're intentionally saying something. You're intent on doing something. You're intentionally speaking something. And so you're speaking those words with intent and vibrating your voice at a certain vibrational frequency, I guess would be the term. And I don't know how they knew these vibrational frequencies, but if you look at Hindu cultures and Indian cultures all around, they're very focused on sound. And in some Buddhist cultures, for example, they spin a wheel, and the words are imprinted on these wheels. And they believed that when the words would be, so what they do is they have these wheels that are like bells, right? And these words are, and they're all lined up, and this is in multiple places, and they go around and they spin these wheels as they walk by. And these words are imprinted on the wheels. And the thought is that the words imprinted on the wheels, when they are physically vibrated and moved like that, the thought is that they will be imprinting those words into the physical reality by creating them with the sound. So right away from that thought process, you know that these ancient people understood that sound was also physical. So how did they know this? Because as far as we know, this is a modern scientific concept. Yet many of these ancient cultures knew this. I just pointed out that how it's possible that the Israelites even knew this. And how did they know this? Probably because they came out of Egypt. And they spent like 8 centuries in Egypt, because for a few centuries they worked as the border guards of the outlying regions to prevent against attack of their enemies. And then once Egyptians were at peace with their enemies, one of the pharaohs went and committed them to bondage for another few centuries. So they were and then I think what the Bible says that they were in bondage for 400 years. They would be in bondage, I think it says. So right away they're sitting there enslaved for 400 years. So they're sitting in Egypt. And remember, the Egyptians did not tolerate these other cultures. So when the Israelites had to practice their culture in secret, and in public they had to practice the Egyptian culture and worship the Egyptian gods. So if the Egyptians knew about sound frequencies and vibrations, potentially so could the Israelites have later in the Battle of Jericho, It's possible. It's a stretch. It's a stretch of conclusions without a lot of direct proof in between, but it's possible. For example, I pointed to the fact that um, in many episodes in the past, I pointed to the fact that in the Bible, they talk about how um, when the Israelites left Egypt, they were guided by the Lord by a pillar of smoke by day and a pillar of fire by night. Well, many military historians who study the ancient world are able to tell you, in fact, if you just go to the Battles BC, the famous History Channel episode, there's a historians talk about this very concept that the Egyptians used these giant braziers on the top of poles and at the head, and they would place them at the head of the column, and in order to direct their column of troops over miles, thousands of troops over miles, during the day, they would cap this brazier to only a small fire and a lot of smoke, so the smoke would billow out in a giant pillar, and the people would be able to follow it, knowing which way the column was marching. And then at night, when it was time to settle down and camp, and the brazier would be uncovered and it would be a giant flame in this time, and they would know to camp. So they literally would use this to travel, through and direct their troops over thousands of miles, or hundreds of miles. Maybe not thousands, but hundreds of miles. So the Israelites would know to use the same concept, especially Moses, who was the adopted prince. So he literally grew up in the house. He was and would have been taught the military tactics that every ruler and prince and king and pharaoh knew. Which, by the way, the term pharaoh is a modern term. They did not call them pharaohs. They called them kings, just like the rest of us. The term for king in that time, I don't even know. I don't even know what it is. But we call them pharaohs in our modern time. They were not called pharaohs back then. I think it was actually a Roman word that was given to them. But anyway, so if I'm remembering correctly, but anyway, so the point is that the Israelites coming out of Egypt knew these things, but to the regular person who just spent the last 20 years as a slave, who knew nothing but pickaxes and stones and the whip, would see this giant pillar of smoke 20 miles away and would say, "Oh, the divine Lord is leading us. This must be the magic of God," without knowing that what you were looking at was misunderstood technology. It's not technology in our terms today, like, a beam of light, a spotlight, a flare, a firework, something to create a signal. It's not that technology, but it's technology for the time. It's more advanced than what the average person has with their little candle and their little torch, so it's more advanced technology. It's military technology that the average person is not privy to. The average person in our culture today is not privy to military technology. So why would you think that in the ancient times it was any different? In fact, it was even worse, because they were all ruled by dictatorships and kings, and there was no such thing as democracy. and except in, few pockets of the world, there was no such thing. And even then, the democracies of the world were basically oligarchies, because in Rome, the democracy was ruled by the nobles. So to be a senator, you had to be born of noble birth. So, I mean, what kind of democracy is that? It's basically an oligarchy. So, and it was the same thing in Greece. So, and most people who could vote in Greece were only the nobles. So it didn't even matter. It was even worse for people back then. Do you think that they knew what a giant brazier 20 miles away wasn't God? Think again. They definitely thought it was God, for a fact. You know what? I want you to go out and try and look 20 miles away and see what you see, because you ain't gonna see shit. And look with your plain naked eyes 20 miles away. You ain't gonna see shit. So, the whole concept of your brain not knowing the truth from the in the middle, all you see is the beginning of end result. The beginning result is there was a giant column of smoke, and then the end result is we got to where we were going. And all you did was follow the smoke in the middle. You didn't know how the smoke got lit. You didn't know how who knew how to do that. You just thought it was magic. You thought it was God. But in reality, it was misidentified technology. Maybe not advanced technology like ours, but technology nonetheless. So you have all these different stories in the world of different results, and you can point to different occurrences. For example, let's go around to another part of the world. You look at, for example, I've been to the pyramids at Chichen Itza twice. You go to Chichen Itza, and on the solstices, the way the sun hits as it's setting, hits the stones, and the way the stones are shaped in the step formation casts a shadow on the ground, and the light reflects off of it. So it looks like a divine beam of light is traveling down this dark shadow, and then and then leading to this dragon at the end. So it looks like so from your perspective watching it, the head of the dragon is glowing and looks like it's shrouded in fire and darkness, when in reality it's just an optical illusion based on the formation of the stone and the angle of the sun. This is physics. But if you're an average person, you don't know. And then you say, what? You say to the elder, you say, Elder, what does this mean? I see this dragon coming down, and I feel the divine presence of God. And they say, yes, this is the god Kukulkan, and he is the great feathered serpent, and he has come down to the heavens, from the heavens and to the earth, to bring your people knowledge and wisdom and magic and all these great things. And you say, wow, that's crazy. But in reality, what you're just doing is you're remembering that 5,000 years ago, a giant spacecraft landed, and a guy who comes from a culture where they worship animals and all these different things, and they're warlike, and they have these animalistic visages on their suits of armor that they wear, and you get down, and now, of course, this being is going to be wearing a suit of armor, because for two reasons. One, is think about our own societies. No matter where we've been in the last 2,000 years, the first people who go anywhere is the military. Military goes and then the people follow because it's safe now from the military. It's the same thing in America. Nobody went anywhere until the military came, and the people who did go got killed. So the military went, paved the way for our people, and then the people follow along. It's the same thing in the ancient cultures. So the extraterrestrials who came here, it's no doubt that they would have been military people first. And even if there were civilians and other things on the ship, the military would go down first. We would send our troops or guards or whatever to come down first. So there's no doubt that, too, this person would have come down here, surveyed the area, realized that we were warlike culture, these people were warlike culture, and would have donned his armor. He would have put on his armor and said, these people are warlike, I got to put on my best armor just in case they decide to fight me, or if they want to worship me, then I better look damn good, like I'm better than them and a stronger warrior than them, because that's all these people understand is fighting and eating. And so he dons his armor, and because they're an animalistic type culture, he's got this dragon snake-like visage on his helmet. And then when he gets down and these people are not attacking him, they're curious and worshiping him like a divine god, he lifts up his armor and it realizes that it's a face underneath and reveals that he kind of looks similar to them. And if you go to the area today and look at depictions of Kukulkan and the similar cultures of Quetzalcoatl in the area, you look at them and you realize that's exactly what they depict. It's the same freaking thing. They literally have stone statues of a guy in a suit with a dragon head, and out of it is lifting up, and inside of it is a regular human face. It looks like a visor, like he just lifted up his helmet like some medieval knight. And he literally is like that. And then you literally go to other statues in the area, and these statues are literally a dragon's head with the mouth open, and out coming of the mouth is a human face. It's literally the same thing. Go back again to misidentified technology. Look at the image on your screen or the image of the podcast later if you're looking at it. You see Moses and he's looking at the fire and he says, it's bright, it's hot. I'm looking at it, and then this voice is coming out of it, and I could kind of barely see the image of a man behind the face. Well, if he didn't know that it was technology and he was looking at a hologram, he didn't know that he was looking at a hologram. So instead he was looking at the divine flame of the Lord, when in reality he was looking at some hologram, and maybe he wanted to look ominous and strong and all imposing, so he created these fake flame images to look like himself, like he was dark and powerful, and he's the god of fire and light and all this stuff and whatever, and so he gets this hazy image of a man that's enshrouded by flames, but he feels the heat and the things, and what he doesn't realize is he's probably looking at some sort of technology, and how he feels the heat, I don't know, but maybe the thing is on fire because of some sort of, his spacecraft lifted on fire, and the tree is on fire, but what he doesn't realize is that there's just a speaker nearby. And the image that he sees of a man's kind of face in the flame is just an optical illusion. The flames are just dancing around, and he hears the sound, but his brain doesn't see the image of a person, so it creates the illusion that there's a person in the flames, when in reality he's just listening to the voice on a speakerphone. So it's like, it's all misunderstood technology, both physical and non-physical. we get all throughout the world, and we realize, because you can example look at the Mahabharata, and you talk about stories of wars, and it creates images and depictions of spaceships and rockets and missiles and all these things, and you know, you have the arrow of Brahma, and it launches and it hits any target it's launched at, even if the target moves, and it never fails to hit its target no matter what. And you know, so what is that? That sounds like a similar to a heat-seeking missile, or a today we have technology where facial recognition technology. The drone can see your face and realize you're the target, and no matter where you move, as long it'll keep tracking your face and it'll still hit you, you know. And so maybe it's technology similar to that. And these people, um, you know, made all these, you know, they made references to hearing the sounds and the thunder and all these noise. And I'm going to take a sip of water real quick.
Tony Gabagool Grandma, it's nothing but fat and nitrates.
Gabagool, over here.
Gabagool. Can't wait to eat some gabagool later. You know we're going to eat the gabagool. And so the point is that there are all these different occurrences where all over the world where they have these beliefs in magic, both physical and what seems to be oddly modern or even future science. For example, we go back to the Tibetan wheels, where the words are carved into the wheel, and then as they push the wheel, it makes a sound and creates a physical impact on the world around us. And then they believe that these words are then being imprinted on the universe. In spiritualism and in our modern time, we have this belief that you know, what you're saying is impacting the world around you. So watch what you say. You might jinx yourself. Well, you know, you're creating good luck or bad luck. You know, well, I always say luck doesn't exist. And in fact, it doesn't exist. Luck is just your misperception on what's happening. I had to touch that thing. And luck is just your misperception on what's happening. For example, you don't realize that when you say and do anything, automatically it creates the possibility for the opposite to happen. This is where we get to alternate universes. For example, let's say today I decide, let's do it really simple, right? Today I decide I'm going to go to work, and I get in the car and I drive to work. Well, there's the possibility that you decided you didn't want to go to work. Or there's the possibility that you got to work, or you were going to work, and on the way there you got into an accident. And you know, or because you didn't go there, you didn't get into some crazy accident or whatever, you know, could have happened. You know, so it creates possible realities going on. But what you're breaking down is your choice. So you say, oh, I'm going to jinx myself by saying, oh, let's say create an even easier example. Say I'm in school and I go, yeah, I'm going to get great grade on this test, all hundreds. And I'm totally confident in it. I'm 100% going to get 100 on the test, A++. And well, now I created the possibility that I didn't get 100. And now I could have gotten all of them wrong. But I also created the possibility, the minor occurrences that I got some of them wrong, a lot of them wrong, majority of them wrong, majority of them right, either or. But let's keep it down to the two. I either got them all right or I got them all wrong. But by saying one thing, I've now created the possibility for the opposite to happen. By saying so, like I could say that, for example, I'm you know mm, trying to think how I want to word what I'm saying. I'm thinking that what I'm saying is mm, you know hmm, when you follow along and you speak the word out into the universe and create its possibility, or even just think about it, you're creating the possibility just by sheer concept for the opposite to exist, because you're thinking about well, if one is life is two sides of the coin. If one is going to happen, then it's possible that it could not happen, or the other could happen. And so by saying, "Oh, I'm going to jinx myself," because I said something good will happen, I'm creating the possibility that the opposite would happen. And so you appear like, "Oh, it's luck because I'm out of the occurrence," but because you think it's luck because you have the A and B, the start and the end result of what's going on, and in between you say it was all just luck, but in reality it was all these different occurrences happening over time, one to the other to the other to the other. And so you get through um, so from there you just create the perspective that luck happened, and there was no A and B, you just saw the end result, when in reality there was all these different possibilities based on your other reactions. I could have gotten a phone call while I was driving to work that distracted the driving and we crashed, or something like that, or the other guy could have, and could have been something out of your occurrence, out of your control, I should say. It doesn't mean that it's impossible or out of reality, but it was out of your physical control. So, the let's go to other examples throughout the world. You know, for then we get into let's get into other concepts. For example, alchemy was considered magic for the longest time, mixing objects together. Today, it's basically just chemistry. I mean, we know that mixing objects together, and doing some sort of reaction to them creates different occurrences and has different end results. So, at the time, it was perceived as magic, but now today we have we mix different chemicals together, and those that reaction is an alchemical response where we get alchemy, but you have all these different examples of magic all throughout the world where we get into a physical sort of action, a physical result. Now, what about regular magic? Real magic where you have a thing. Well, we started touching on that in the beginning with the spoken word and the impacting the world around you. It's a combination of all those things. For example, you must, when you're speaking the words to impact the universe around you, the ancients say you must vibrate your voice. So when you hear in the terms of the Egyptians, they would do that, they would vibrate their voice. The the Romans and the Greeks, when they wanted to make their voices be louder for the masses, not only did they build their stadiums with acoustical properties, but then they also knew how to project their voice in a certain way in order to be able to be louder and physically impact the people around them by making them hear the sound. So, and impact, and the people would listen and they would hear the boisterousness of your voice and they would say, this person is divine because they're able to speak so loudly and so clearly with magical powers, but it was really just that they were able to vibrate their voice. You hear these mantras in Hinduism, they're speaking with a vibrational tone. If you go to Scandinavian cultures in the north, they had these runes. These runes were words that they would carve and speak of, and they would create a physical, they were believed to create a physical impact in the world. So they would carve these runes, which meant certain words and certain powers, and then they would speak the words aloud. And these spoken words would have a physical impact on the world around them. They thought that this would make magic, that by speaking the words into existence, this is why in these areas you find carvings all over of these words carved into it in different runes. And this is why the runes were believed to hold power, because they held power all over the world. They held power by speaking into the universe, by speaking the words that they were in the universe. And so what is real magic? Real magic is how you impact the world around you. Is it potentially possible then that your magic could do things like create fire, create lightning, teleport you around, bring the dead back to life? It's possible. For example, we look at the Ark of the Covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was believed to have lightning powers where it would shock you and bleed you from the inside. It would, there's a story of the priest's sons who weren't properly garbed and they walked into the ark without their proper permission by God, and they were struck down by the lightning bolts going into their nose and burning them from the inside. Some modern ancient astronaut theorists have said that this sounds like, radiation or something, or electrical shock or whatever. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But the point is that there was something that they didn't understand, and then there was a physical reaction and a physical result into the world. Then we go, isn't my phone on silent? How the fuck am I getting a call? My phone's literally on silent. How the fuck am I getting a call? How does that make sense? Anyway, um, and then um, so out in um, out in the world, in different cultures all around, there are different concepts of this spoken word. For example, it's starting to become to light that it's possible that Jesus was part of the Essene culture. The Essenes were supposed to be the mystics who who were very, pious in their religion and all this stuff, and then um, had they were believed at one time to be a society of only men, when in reality it's starting to come to light now that they were a society of families and men and women, and Jesus might have either been a part of this or was joined into it or whatever. But if that was the case, then it's possible that his magical abilities came from being a mastery of their Essene magic and sorcery that they talked about. It's possible that because the Essenes were very outspoken, quote unquote, pun intended, or no pun intended, about the um, spoken word as being part of the magic. For example, if you remember in the Bible with the story of Lazarus and raising him from the dead, you remember Jesus speaks. He says, Lazarus, come out and come to me and wake up and walk out here, and you are healed and fine. And all of a sudden, he does exactly that. He speaks it out loud. And then, or doesn't he also lay? Well, I think there's an interpretation where he also physically lays on his body. So remember, these cultures have a concept that you have to have a spoken impact and also a physical impact on the world. Today, we interpret that as what's the word that people call it? But it's your intent. While speaking about something, you have the intent on the action to create the result that you want. And in this case, he wanted him to come back from the dead. Also, look at stories of Buddha. Buddha would be standing there and with magic, and he may or may not be speaking, but he would raise his arms up and then he would teleport to the other side of the river. And this is spoken about on many occasions. Buddha would, through his psychic powers, create a physical walkway, and they would call it a bejeweled walkway in the sky, and he would walk across this thing and ponder for hours. He would literally just walk back and forth. Well, what if you didn't understand that what he was doing was manipulating light energy? Maybe he had some sort of technology that was able to do it, or maybe he knew of some advanced physics that we don't know about, so today it's just called magic. But he created this quote unquote bejeweled walkway that he would walk on, that some people say would reflect light or glow or whatever, but to me it sounds like he knew how to manipulate light in some sort of way. And, so right away you're talking about physics and impact and all around the world. Let's go to another part of the world now where you would again hear about the Druids. The Druids are very famous. In fact, most of the accounts that we know of the Druids today that have survived actually come from Julius Caesar's writings, because they would try and go over there And the Druids would literally sometimes fight, a lot of their tribes would fight naked, paint their skin blue, and only go into battle with their swords, no armor, and they were ferocious. And they said that they would fight, as if they were possessed by some sort of demons, and they would do some sort of spells. And it's known that the Druids would create, these magical things, and were able to create these stone platforms and all of that. It's thought that Merlin was one of the last of the Druids, or somebody who understood Druidry, who was either self-taught or taught by, one of the remaining few or whatever, but the Druids had these same concepts of they would speak the words aloud, and then they would do something physical to ensure that what they were speaking into the universe would become a physical reality onto them. So it's interesting because we know that sound is both physical and exists as a wave, but how did these people know back in the day that their sound would have a physical impact on the universe around them? Did somebody teach them this? Did they learn it for thousands of years because of what we talked about in our past of lost societies and cultures in our universe, that worlds that we don't don't exist anymore, cultures that we lost? Think about Atlantis. Atlantis may not have been this magical, mystical place. It may just be it may not have even been called Atlantis, but it could just be a concept that there was culture and society before we think of today as culture and society, which goes back to the Sumerians in Sumer in 5 to 6,000 years ago. So so we're talking about before that. And so is it possible that there were some people who were able to teach them this? Well, that's what they say. And where did they say that these people came from, who taught them this? The sky, the heavens. They came down to the earth and taught us this knowledge. They taught us this magic. For example, in Greece and in Rome and in Egypt, many of the gods were considered gods of magic. They had all these abilities. And look at Odin too. Odin had all these powers of foresight and clairvoyance and futuristic whatever the fuck, and all these different things. And you would hear all these different occurrences, and they would I lost my train of thought. Somebody came down and taught them. Somebody taught them about how to do all of this, and then cultures and societies passed it along. First, they didn't have the written word. They had the spoken word, and all they could do was orally transcribe the history to you. And they would speak these words into the universe, and they would put as much drama and energy and power and verbalization and force behind their words to convey to you how important these things are. And when they would teach it to you, they would teach it to you with emphasis and pride and strength and knowledge and wisdom. And they would pass it along until we got to the written word. And then with the written word, you would say, no, this is the proof because it's written down. Obviously we can't take all the stories to be fact, because we know, for example, the whole New Testaments of the Bible were written in 313 and beyond BC, AD, when Jesus died in like 30 BC. So, 30 AD. My God, I just got all my times backwards. It was ridiculous. So when you're talking about almost 300 years later, you're writing these books down, very obviously it's not going to be 100% accurate. That's just obvious, but there are the stories that have been passed down. We know, for example, all these stories of, finding the Shroud of Turin and, the true cross and all of that. First of all, there's no friggin' way that the cross that Jesus was crucified on, because Jesus was crucified and he was a real person. We know this from Roman historical facts. So he was a real person whose parents really had to travel to Bethlehem to register for the census, and they really had to travel and all this stuff. Did they really run from King Herod, who was killing all the firstborn sons? Oh, maybe, maybe not. It's possible. It's not. He wouldn't be the only king or emperor at the time or at any time who would do such a thing to ensure their rule and their their heirs' rule. So it's not impossible. But we know from historical facts during Roman times that these things did happen. Jesus was crucified on a cross, but there's no freaking way that 300 years later that cross still was surviving for Constantine's mother Helena to go and find. Bullshit, bro. There's no way that 300 years later that wood was surviving. Come on. Go chop up some wood, make a cross, chop it down, and then watch how long it survives for. Okay? Guarantee you will outlive it. All right? It'll break down. It'll go. Even if you treat the wood, for example, even if you treat the wood, go chop down a regular tree and watch how long it decays. It's not going to take 300 years. It may sit there for 10, even 20 years, and it might slowly decay over time, but it's not going to sit there for 300 years. I'm sorry. There's no way that that cross was even really still there 300 years later when Helena went and got it. Sorry. It's just an obvious fact that it's a fake. But the point is that all these people believe it. What if, and then you say, well, all these people believe it to the point where they say that these miracles do happen. Yeah, but what if you got to remember that these people came from the ancient cultures where they knew about the spoken word, where they knew about the gods and their abilities for magic and their teachings of magic that was passed down from the ancient times. What if Helena, being a Christian she was, quote unquote, maybe she also knew the magic. Maybe she wanted people to believe in it, so she knew how to speak the words into magic. For example, there's also, I'll go to something I recently learned, but there's a thought frame that actually the people who come from I don't know, was it Ireland or Scotland or something in that area, may be descendants of Akhenaten's daughter, who was King Tut's sister. One of the sisters. I guess he had more than one or whatever they're saying. I have no idea about this. We have to do a shit ton of research on it. But there are references to this person, this woman who came there, and there are references to her name in Egypt as Tutankhamun's sister, Akhenaten's daughter, who fled because of the persecution of her father. Is this all possible? It is possible, but I don't know, we have to do more research on that. But if it was true, it would explain why they had the same or similar magical concepts as the ancient Egyptians did, because the Egyptians had all these magical concepts of the spoken word, and later the Celts and the Druids had the same magical concepts of the spoken word It may be that they did come from the same area, so it's possible, but what I want you to remember is that whenever you speak anything, lighthearted or not, you're making a physical impact in the world, especially if you know how to speak it properly by creating vibrations in your body as you're talking. So when you do this and you speak these words out into the universe, you're creating a physical impact onto life as you know it. So remember this in your daily life. As you speak and you want to accomplish your goal or accomplish something, go out there and speak the words into existence. Even try and do crazy magical things. Try and lift an object with your mind by speaking the truth of it into the world. Speak it out there and say that you will see this, you will do that, you will understand, you will accomplish your goal. Just try little things like that. Go out and speak the world you want to see into existence. You want the world to be a happier place? Go out and speak it. But then realize that speaking it is not enough. Speaking the words into existence is not enough to create the magic. You must also have a physical impact. So you want to see the world be a better, happier, more peaceful place? Go out there and speak it into existence. Be a happy person. Speak happiness into the world. Be positive. And when you go around and people say something negative, put a positive spin on it. Keep on going. And go out there and do something about it. You can't just say, oh, I want to, feed the poor or whatever, so I want there to be more. Well, go out there and work at a soup kitchen. Become a politician and change the world with the laws. Do something out there. Be the change you want to see in the world. Speak the change into existence and then follow it up with physical action. This is what all the ancients have been telling us all this time. Speaking the world into existence requires feeling it, speaking it, and believing it. I want to thank you all for joining me on this wonderful, wonderful day. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, rest of your week. We will see you next week for episode 60 of the podcast. We'll see you Thursday for games. Don't forget to, like, follow, subscribe, all of that. Whatever is there. Listen, if you missed any part of the podcast, follow on all streaming platforms and all podcasting platforms later on. And follow on X for up-to-the-minute news and up-to-the-minute updates. And love y'all. Have a great, wonderful day.
Oh yeah!